It's very excited to have Nick with us today, and I'll head over to Nick to share the story. So I thought it's just good to paint a picture about the time frame and horizons we are talking about. 2 years ago, June 2024, Lisa, which is the chief exec of the customer arm at Meridian organization, reached out asking for support heading into the operating model design and change. So think about 2 years ago, end of 2024 we were going through the problem solving of how the future of the organization may look like. And then the flip happened. The organization moved to a new design early 2025. So a year and a half ago. So the journey, the lessons learned about operating models embedded year and a half in already. But before we go there, I'll ask Nick to paint a picture of how it was year and a half before that. So we get the last 3 years journey in the story. So yeah, very excited to have Nick. And maybe to kick off, Nick, if you could share a little bit of the context of Meridian in the customer business, what role it plays in Meridian and in New Zealand.
So I joined Meridian about 3 years ago, so in November 2023, so about 7 or 8 months before Casper and Co came in. And when I joined in, it was what I would describe as a very traditional corporate. So within retail, so there are lots of business units. So Gentailer, so there's retail, generation, corporate services, also a whole bunch of business units. And within retail, it was very traditional. So sales, marketing, customer care, or contact center, and it was very silent. I joined around about October that year, and by December I thought I wanted to leave because it wasn't what I signed up for. But I enjoyed because there was a bunch of really good people. So the customer leadership team at the time, one of my best mates actually worked there. He was the person who sort of brokered an intro into the company. And he's like, "Hey, we both work in power. You should come play over here. It's kind of cool." And there was a really cool vision, and there was a really solid leadership there. And the retail business could kind of do what it wanted. However, they hadn't made the most of that opportunity. So if you don't know about Meridian obviously is a big generator retailer. It's the biggest generation company in New Zealand. The retail business has two major brands, so PowerShop and Meridian. And at the time when I joined, Meridian had been on a big negative slide. So Meridian had lost customers for 4 or 5 years in a row. PowerShop was sort of just treading water. So PowerShop was run as a subsidiary for a long time. It had been bought back into the mothership, and it was sort of just treading water, trying to find its identity within a bigger business. I came in with all these ideas and wanting to do fun things, but he sort of hit roadblocks pretty quickly. And as I said, I did genuinely want to leave because I was a contractor when I first joined. I was like, do I really want to do this? But as I said, I was convinced. And then we started this journey of transformation within a few months of me joining. And then started quite traditionally. So it started with a McKinsey in. I hope everybody's probably done that. So we had McKinsey come in, to create credibility with the board. And you sort of made a case for where you wanted to go, how you were going to get there. And that was sort of the start of it. Maybe about me. Right now, I'm the head of energy for Ho. So what does that mean? We're going to talk a lot about it through this interview. But ultimately, I'm responsible for the end-to-end outcomes of Meridian and PowerShop in a residential context. So when I say end-to-end outcomes, so product delivery, marketing, sales, growth, profitability, customer service, all the way through that stack.
I remember with that context, the first step that Lisa and the team did was to actually relook at the strategy. So how we are going to pivot as an organization, and where do you want to double down, where we want to play, what needs to change. Another part of that change of intent was you guys decided to run a series of experiments to see what's feasible, what's possible, and those experiments gave a lot of insights. Yeah, could you share more about those?
Yes, totally. So we did this work with McKinsey and sort of reaffirmed the direction we're going. And for all the other power company people, it's exactly the same as what you're all trying to do. Like it's no different, right? If you're in a competitive industry with other people doing what you're doing, everybody's probably going to be doing the same thing. So you need to look at your point of difference. And we came to you sort of point to everything. You go, the technology doesn't work, or the operating model's bad, or the structure's bad. We don't have the right people. You kind of just, you go around all the standard things, you go, it's all of that, but it is actually all of that. It's not one individual thing. And the first thing we tried was, we know our tech's probably not going to be the technology that takes us through in the future. So let's run an experiment. Let's ring fence a bunch of people and build some kit and see how that goes and actually start to experiment. And you very quickly get into the, oh, actually, it's not just tech. We need some different ways of thinking. We need some different ways of working. We need some different ways of leading. We need different ways of how we access money. And you very quickly build up what you thought was a small experiment becomes quite a big experiment. And so we did this thing, and again, very privileged to be able to do this. We had support from our leaders all the way to the top. I shared this with Casper the other day, and he wasn't aware of this. But early doors, we had our chief executive at the time, Neil Barclay, talked to retail. He said, this was maybe 6 months into the experiment, and he said, I never asked you to do this. So again, you've probably all been on the end of a, hey, you need to cut OPEX, you need to cut some headcount kind of restructure. It's like, I never asked retail to do this. You came to me saying you don't have the conditions to succeed and we need to transform our retail business. And that was actually true. And because of that, they were very supportive of letting us sort of play because we ran a very successful retail business. But we knew we couldn't continue to be a successful retail business without transforming. So we spun up this experiment and we called it base camp. So it was like climbing a mountain. We're saying, well, first stop's base camp. You stop there for provisions, you have a bit of a rest before you climb the mountain. And we sort of grabbed 20 or 30 people from around the business and we ran a startup within our business, a very well-funded startup. And we took a bit of a steer from, a little bit of agile, a little bit of other bits and pieces that people have. We had some people come in and support us with that. But ultimately, it was a ring-fence business with very, very clear but simple objectives. So it was build new products that create value for customers, get to a scale that you prove they're actually valuable, and do it by any means necessary. We like find that collision of capability and technology. So we spun up a bunch of teams and we built tech from the ground up, all the way from Azure subscriptions, platform configuration, building software, and within 3 or 4 months, we had 1,000 customers on a new product built on a new technology from scratch. And so that was kind of the start of the experiment.
Awesome. And that experiment lasted for a couple of months, and then the team asked themselves how we make it not experiment, but as a no, how we can speed and achieve the speed to get to a new products to market and customers at no. So that was when the leadership team talked about moving from experiment to scaling. And this is what was the conversation of the why, right? That Nick, can you share more about that?
Yeah, so to my point earlier, that we had this bold strategy, and probably other companies are probably the same as well, but we had this bold strategy that we want customers to access cleaner and cheaper energy. And as an electricity retailer, you vend electrons. It's not that sexy, right? I pass electrons through to you and I bill you for that privilege. But we wanted to make it cleaner and cheaper and the conditions that we were in, operating model technology, the capability we had in the business. The energy wasn't going to get cheaper and cleaner by itself. And there were plenty of overseas examples of harnessing technology or harnessing ways you can actually deliver cheaper energy to customers. And I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. We should do that. And it wasn't going to happen in the conditions we had. We had an ability to bill a price times a quantity, and we could do that accurately, but we couldn't do all the cool stuff. And so again, that was part of that experiment. And to my points earlier, it proved pretty quickly, given the right conditions, you can do some pretty cool stuff. And Casper talked about within a couple of months of the experiment. The experiment actually ran for about 9 months in total. So from about February of 2024 to the end of the year. But at about the midpoint of that, around June, that was when we're like, it's working, let's do it. And so that didn't take too much convincing.
Yep. And before moving to the design phase, if you could share a few lessons from the experiments, because I know that you shared with me last week that one surprising thing was when, as leaders, you wanted to empower the teams working on stuff. They were quite puzzled what to do with this size of empowerment they received.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things. Like, again, everybody's probably had an engagement survey where people are like, oh, decision makers, you don't listen to us, and you don't talk to us, you don't take our feedback on board. But when you actually grab, again, 30 odd people and you're making all the decisions, here's a pot of money, go. They don't want to do it. They really don't. There's a lot of asking for permission, there's a lot of pattern behavior. So there's a big period of unlearning and actually showing people that when you think about the decision, again, I'm going to make a number up. Let's say the pot of money is $5 million. It's a big decision to spend $5 million. But if you break it down and you go, well, what's the next small decision we want you to make? And you actually help equip them with that ability to critically think through their alternative options, critically think around, well, is that the path of least resistance to create the next unit of value? It becomes a lot easier. But it was a massive learning curve for a lot of our people. In fact, a lot of our high performers, they were used to just sort of doing work. And when you get them empowered to make decisions, they get it's like a deer in the headlights. And so you've really got to work through that. You've got to coach through that. You've got to help them understand that you've got their back. You've got to help them understand all the different moving parts of making decisions and impart a bunch of that knowledge on them. So that was a really good learning. It was really cool because you also found people from all parts of the business who just grew 6 foot tall. Like right now, one of my star product owners was a call center staff member 2 years ago, literally 2 years ago. It was on the front line taking calls. They're now delivering apps. Pretty cool. And they've got a team of engineers. Another big learning, don't build your own technology. Just don't do it. It's really hard. You get really frustrated with Microsoft. What else? Share stories, good, bad, or indifferent was another big one. There was another bug that sort of started becoming embedded in our culture. How do you frequently share stories? How do you get people in front of people that have other like this? I'm electrified right now. I'm shaking and sweaty. But how do you get people in front of people talking about the cool stuff they've been doing? Because it is actually really cool when you think about it.
Awesome, thank you. So you shared how the business looked and feel before the change, and throughout the one of the big anchor was how do we replicate the speed to market in the new operating model? How do we design for speed, right? Can you talk a little bit about how now the structured operating model looks like? Yeah, you can share out and show the picture, how the picture to show, but you can start with just describing.
Yeah, so when I talked about when I joined, very traditional operating model, sales, marketing, service, and it was quite blaming. You might have targets and every business unit, but I've done my job. It's that one. That one's not performing. And there were lots of handovers of things, so, I'm winning lots of customers. But I can't service them. You didn't talk to me. There's a lot of that going on. And that was kind of when we got radically in, we had another group of people, Brendan over there. He was part of the original crew that came in to help us. Actually thinking about, well, what's the value we're trying to create and how do you organize around that? So a customer isn't a sales journey and then a service journey. It's just one customer, right? They need to be treated like one customer. They're humans. They're not just a bill. And actually organizing to value was one of the big things. So that's how we structured the base camp group. So we organized around the value we wanted to create. We didn't get it all right. We really didn't. And then when we went into the actual operating model design, we thought about, well, who are we creating value for? So who is the customer? And again, I don't know if this is necessarily right, and it'll probably change in the next few years. But we landed on, well, you've got customers at home and you've got customers in their business, and they don't have homogenous needs. So how do you think about designing for that? And how do you create the right model that creates end-to-end ownership and empowerment to be able to do something that can impact that value creation? And so that's ultimately where we landed on with our structure. So in agile terms, it's your chapter and value stream kind of model. So we've got 2 value streams, and you've got your supporting practices like product, that. And so we sort of effectively build a bunch of teams within that construct that deliver value.
And then I remember, so within this is like was the energy for home, the energy for business, and I remember the different squads within the home. They own the pieces of the segment as well. So each squad own a specific customer home problem, right?
We started, and this has evolved, like in 2 years it's changed many times, even this is out of date. We're just going through another change of making sure we've got things lined up. But within each of those value streams, again, customers are not homogenous, they've all got different needs. And so again, it's just a macro segmentation of your home and business customers to think about, well, what are the needs they have? Who's more willing to potentially participate in our industry being part of the energy transition? Who just wants to build? And actually looking at how you meet those needs. Otherwise, I don't know if you've all heard of the one size fits none kind of concept, because that's effectively where you land if you think everybody's the same.
So Nick, you are leading lead group of people. However, you don't have formal authority, right? So how does it work day to day for you?
It was actually a big, it was a big change. So I have, well, I now have a couple of direct reports, but at the time of the start of this model, I had no direct reports. So it was kind of a all care, no responsibility. But I was lucky enough early in my career to get a lot of opportunities to later influencing. So how do you sort of take control of a P&L or a project where you might spin up a team, you might have to get something done, and then that team disbands and you move on to the next thing. So I was really lucky that I got exposure to that 10, 15 years ago. And so in this model, I have no direct reports, and I lean on my leadership team to beg, borrow, and steal resource. Not really, but it's a shared accountability, and that's probably another big lesson is you either all succeed or you all fail, and and that's and that's quite hard to wrap your head around, and a lot of our team did struggle with that because they were used to not necessarily command and control, but I've got line of sight to that person. I can tell them what to do. I control that budget. I can do that. But ultimately, you can't lead like that through this model. And I've talked to Gaster about one thing that I've found really, really cool in our organization is it's not necessarily about your subject matter expertise that gets you to a leadership position. It's actually been crafted leadership. And my boss, Lisa, she runs an operation where ultimately, like, we could all move one seat to the right or to the left, and we could still do a good job. So I'm by no means a brand and experience expert, but I would feel comfortable that Tom has done a really good job setting that team up. And I think that, in fact, there's been on quite a bit of lead. I've helped with that team for a wee bit. So that is very much around, like, as a leadership team, what's your craft? Yep, you might be a sales and marketing expert or you might be a digital expert, but ultimately you're here to lead people. You don't do the work. Maybe you do, but you don't really do the work. You're not on tools, you're not coding a new app or anything like that. So how do you actually lead people to achieve outcomes and to deliver value?
The part of the work was not only like how this picture is going to look like, but how the leadership team is going to work and how the next layer of leaders is going to work together. So the soft and the cadence in the meetings and the principles of aligning quarterly, making those choices together, as Nick said, the leadership team is either winning together or losing together. So it's like joint goals and joint focus is very, very important. I remember that James McGill from Origin Zero year ago, but he shared this one sentence that really resonated with me is that, like, for successful organizations, he called it leadership chemistry is very, very important to get right. And I know that Lisa and you as a team work really hard to develop the leadership chemistry because so for visibility, so Nick is playing the role in energy of how, and then the digital product, the brand experience, the customer relationships, the strategy, commercial people, they all give people to Nick to deliver the energy for home mission. And so they need to be highly, highly aligned all the time that this is the right thing that we're doing. This is our priority. We are all standing behind, and they are just giving people to Nick to deliver on the home outcomes. And if they're not like Nick, they'll probably taking people back, right? So it's about, or if they'll disagree with me. And so it's the balance between having the tension, disagreement, debate, but then moving on together. Yeah, Lisa really invested in that.
Yeah, I'll even go back to when we started the org design with Radifree, and we engaged all of our tier 4 leaders. So everybody who reported to a customer relationships leadership team member, they were part of the construct of this. And it was actually quite different. You don't often consult about your own job before you go into a model. And it took a high degree of maturity and trust to be able to do that. Like, I can't remember if you recall, but we had workshops with our head of product, with our head of brand, our head of marketing. They're all in there kind of basically justifying what is the capabilities we need in these cross-functional teams and how do we think about leading through that. And I've been through plenty of restructures and I haven't had that degree of engagement on actually, well, let's redefine together where we think we need to go. Obviously, that ASTEM experiment helped a lot. There's lots of people on the periphery that looked at it and went, that's pretty cool. I think we should do more of that. I'm not necessarily saying go do a scaled experiment where you build a startup in your business, but how you can create proof points of that is better and how you can engage people through that transformation is really important to build that trust. It hasn't always been that way. Like, to my points earlier, like, there was a big adjustment period for people who were used to having big teams or big empires of people or big budgets to kind of have that almost, you naturally jump to, you're diluting that. but you really aren't. You're just going, actually, there's just a few more people here to help you through that. Like, I don't know if anybody's a Warriors fan, but everybody sees when someone comes out of the defensive line, there's a hole, someone goes through, they score a try. You've got to be like that. You've got to trust the person to the left of you and to the right of you that they're going to do a good job.
Yeah, that was lots of risks and challenges to manage when we Lisa asked us to bring like 30 additional people to be part of the process. How do you balance the decision making versus inclusivity? So that was a fun challenge, but Lisa had this culture in mind, and we are in it together. I wanted to ask also about another big change. So part of that conversation was where and how much of technology ownership customer can have. Can you talk a little bit about the change, what was before and after?
Yes, this was a really interesting part of the transformation. So again, for anybody in a big business, we might have centralized services. So we were operating with a central ICT function. So they ran, your hardware provisioning, your broad platforms, your billing system, that all of that. Our data. In fact, we even had to work with them to get access to data analysts and whatnot. And again, part of that transition initially, where catalyst for transition is the business as it stood at the time was not going to make energy cleaner and cheaper for customers because it was a very traditional business. And for those who are in retailers, say if you figure out, retailing is very different from generating. It is very different. The things you need to do with technology are like chalk and cheese. And so Lisa was very clear that we need to be clear on what we need. We need to actually articulate that, and we need to work firstly with our centralized function to go to, hey, can you provide this? Can you help us with this? And if not, she was going to back us to create it ourselves. And so I'm not advocating for everybody to create satellite ICT functions, by the way, but ultimately within retail, we've built the data and digital capability, and that's everything from platform administration to platform engineering, software engineering, data engineering. We have that within our retail business. It was hard. It was hard to get there because, again, some of my ego comments earlier, like there was a lot of ego and ownership. There was a lot of, well, you can't do that, right? That's not your profession or your craft. Like, why should we trust you to do that? So there's a lot of trust building at Lisa's level, so at the exec level. But ultimately, she empowered us to do what we needed to and work through the hard stuff with her chief technology officer counterpart. And ultimately, it's actually working really well. And we work really closely with our ICT function. Sort of when you got past that ego of we need to provide that service, and you can actually show, hey, our needs are actually non-homogenous, just to my one size fits none analogy, with the rest of the business. We got there. And now our retail data and digital team shares a lot of ways of working with our ICT team. They're going through a transformation now, and they're sort of following our lead on how we operate and how we can actually work better together. And ultimately, it'll all merge back together.
Thanks for sharing. I'll throw now back to the tables. I'd like you to have a conversation at your tables, and I'd like you to discuss two topics. So one is, what are the challenges that you are facing, you have at the moment, and any things that inspire you so far from what Nick shared, that might be, you might like to try and that. So just to have a conversation, a couple of minutes at your table, share your own stories, and then we'll go back to the conversation post change. Awesome. Let's get back to the zero. And maybe I'm very curious to hear one or two tables. Any discussions, anyone like to share what you discuss, insights from your own places and just through the conversation? You can see there's a hand up back or walk.
It's about leadership by leadership support, that autonomy, that agency, that empowerment. That's something that, we could all kind of take a lesson. I'd like to meet your leadership team actually and see what their secret sauce is. So thank you.
Someone else like to share a comment, insight?
Yeah, so I guess it's just a really, really false belief. But I guess the reason for that is the conditions that buy-in that buy-in creates for the, so the conditions that buy-in creates for the people trying to implement on the map across the whole business is so fundamental to making it work. Otherwise, very much can't allow people to be traditional views held without seeing the benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be my answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Hamish. I know that Lisa, I think 6 years she's the exec, and she was really, I think she'll don't mind me sharing that, but in the first few years, as an executive member, she maybe didn't have much influence, and post that change, I know that in many ways the CEO is saying to other execs, you should do what Lisa is doing, you should do what Lisa is doing, right? So if you think about it, it's like experiments scaling from one team to many teams, then to the function, and now the rest of the organization is curious about how we can lead differently. So it's the leading through influence and showcasing.
It'd be wrong of me not to share a funny anecdote about Lisa right now, but maybe about 6 or 7 months into the transformation, Lisa was talking with their leadership team, and she's just like, she's basically saying to us, I'm really bored. What should I be doing? Like, because, and we just sort of said to her, it's like, well, we're doing our job so you can be bored. And so it's really painful now though, because she's an AI expert now. So she spent that finance and F5 coding and creating agents, and it's a slippery slope. But it is like, to your point earlier, like it is very much like you've got to let go of a lot of stuff, and people feel really uncomfortable. Like all the things that made you famous, you kind of got to let go of a lot of them, and you just got to help people make it. So, like, I'm a big firm believer of you don't need to know everything. You just got to ask a good question, and you got to be able to challenge in a positive way. And that's kind of my job now. It's quite cool. It's quite fun.
When we started doing the work, there was this painted this, we call it the principles that are informing. So a lot of things that we talked are on the right was before, and you wanted to achieve more of the things on the left through that change, through that transformation. I'll keep it in the background, but if you could share more about like how it feels now, what people say on the ground, what's how teams work, team operates, what you were managed to scale from the Basecamp experiment to the organization, what did not work as intended.
I'll start with how does it feel? It feels pretty good. Like you see people playing out of their lane, which is quite cool. Like to my comment earlier, like I'll say it first, I won't say it last one. Alicia was literally a frontline agent 2 years ago, and she's leading a team of engineers delivering apps now. And you get to see people grow 6 foot tall. You get to see people take up opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have had. And people who embrace it love it. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people who don't love it. A lot of people like structure. A lot of people like, and it's not that we're not structured, but they like a different kind of structure. There's a lot of words here, but ultimately, like it came down to how do you create the conditions in which you can thrive. So how do you actually create the right conditions in which people can make safe decisions and can actually see their progress? And probably my favorite saying, it's probably not even on there, but no, it is. We've got this sort of repetitive saying, we go small, simple now. What's the smallest, simplest way you can deliver value now? And that isn't without any view of where you want to go, but it's how do you do the smallest, simplest thing that gets you a little bit closer to that? And that little bit closer to that could be delivering value, or could be learning something. And there's as much value in learning something as there is in delivering value. Like again, as a leader, you don't want to over-index on just learning. You actually want to deliver some value. But people actually, when they start to clock that, it's okay if I don't get it right, so long as I understand what I'm going to do differently next time. And to one of the earlier comments I made, you can create that muscle, build that muscle of breaking down the work. So it's not one big elephant. You've all heard the saying, how do you win the elephant one? It's literally that. Like if I need to build a new app, that's hard. But if I need to build a feature, it's a little bit simpler. If I need to build 2 features, a little bit simpler. And if I have the license to get it wrong, knowing that I've got the team around me to fix it, it's a very different conversation.
Wanted to ask now about in one of the headers of this event was that Meridian achieved improvement of speed of delivery by 2 to 3 folds. Can you share a little bit more about that claim? I think that was the clip by the reason why there's so many audience.
I'll give a broader macro view, and I'll give a micro example. So about 9 months in to the transformation of the year. Like I mentioned earlier, Meridian had been going backwards in a growth sense for a long period of time. It sort of relied on large scale commercial contracts to sort of keep tipping customer accounts over. And we were like, hang on, this is a bit weird. Let's do something about it. We set an objective. We said, hey, we want Meridian to grow. How much people to go and do things. And it turned it around. So within 6 or 9 months, Meridian had started to grow again and grew 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. And that was without big new marketing brand strategy. It was, hey, you're empowered to go and do what you think might work and run a series of experiments to figure out how to get to your audience and how to actually convert them. You can play with products, you can play with incentives, make sensible business. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but it was ultimately that. So that was really cool that you could actually set a bigger goal, a bigger objective, and you could empower a bunch of people to go and do it. And they do it. Micro thing, something went wrong with one of our apps on, not last week, but the week before, on a Friday. And it was a pretty big thing. It was, it's not getting into detail. So it went wrong at about 4 o'clock on a Friday. We've all had that. And it was one of those 4:30 on a Friday talking to people going, do we need to solve this now? And I don't really want you to work on the weekend. And they're like, no, we think we're good. We're not going to, that's not going to impact customers. We'll figure it out on Monday. And actually having that confidence that on the Monday morning, they got together, they architected a solution, they built the solution, they tested the solution. By 6 o'clock that night, they deployed it into production for 100,000 users. That was pretty cool. And that was led by that person I talked about before. She's not a software engineer. She's just empowering people to do their job and making good decisions.
I think this is what I wanted to share. Go back to your early comments. All the companies within the similar industry, we have the privilege working across the business. Like the strategies are very similar. There are subtle differences, but if you look at different telcos, different banks, strategies are similar. What is differentiating is ability to deliver quickly and pivot and maneuver. And the speed, I know that that was one of the lessons from the base camp for listeners. To grow market share, we need to be faster. Because if we're faster, we can change direction more often. We can recognize what works, what doesn't more. Rather than making those big bets, how we change the operating system to be biased towards small bets. So it's a big program of work, big direction, big vision, but how we can break it down to smaller bets. So we are right and wrong more often, or we can change the decision more often. I wanted to ask you, talked about the context of the business, struggling a little bit, losing customers. How's going now? Like the tangible KPIs. I'm curious to hear the people and the engagement, the business metrics.
Yeah. So, how are we going? We are growing. We've grown 20 or 30,000 customers in the last 12 months while going through a tech transition, while going through an operating model change. Customer engagement. So our not customer engagement, retail engagement, people engagement, our ENPS was pretty low a couple of years ago. I'm going to make a number up. Let's say -30. In March this year, it's +15. And it is sawtoothing a little bit, but depending on the time you do a survey, when you don't customer NPS, or we measure customer happiness, and it is a bit rocky at the moment. Again, it's not always green. It's a bit rocky. Some of the transitions are going that well, but some is going really well. And so customer happiness is around about 60-65% at the moment, if you look at it at an macro level. We're profitable. You've got in your report going into we're profitable and we're growing.
Awesome. Year and a half in, what's I guess not everything that you've designed or chosen to do at the beginning was right. What are the lessons, the mistakes that you guys made, the things that are not working, and what you've done or what you're going to do next about that?
You could probably write a book about all the things you've gotten wrong, but I think that's a good thing. I think like actually knowing you're going to make a mistake, and we're going to know something. Lots of little cliches, but when you're not pouring concrete around things, you can change it. So right now we're going through a change where, I talked about that end-to-end accountability. Our service team, so the people who deal with customers, were somewhat at arm's length through the original design of the model. And that wasn't working. They're feeling disconnected. It was still that siloed version of the world I described earlier, where it was now for maybe 70% of the business operating in a particular way and 30% of the business still kind of at arm's length. And so one of the big lessons from that and what we're working through at the moment is how do you bring that closer to the rest of the business? It's one model. We're all working in the same way. But similarly, that team's got to give their 50%. The rest of the business has got to give their 50%. Things like how do we get more of our people closer to customers? So how do we get people dealing with customers on the daily and actually listening and actually interacting? And I'll use a simple example that it was really cool to actually see it in action a couple of weeks ago. For those marketers in the room, you send customers something and you're done with it. You put it out in the market or you send an email and you're kind of done with it. We're operating in a way where you go and sit now. So, I saw the first one a few weeks ago. You go sit with the team that actually takes the customer phone calls and emails and chats. You send the email and you sit there and you respond to customers with them. So you sit in the team, you actually answer emails, you're there if there's a phone call, because when someone calls, it can get a hear, but you're there to help answer things about the thing you've said. And it's very controlled. It gets you much closer to the customer. Our leadership team commits to listening to calls hourly, at least sort of 10 calls around about. We get in every now and then and we answer emails, and at some point I'll build up the courage to actually take a live phone call. But I'd encourage everybody to do stuff like that. How do you get closer to the customer? But yeah, we've made a lot of mistakes. That one that I talked about, that big one around, for whatever reason in the original design, our front line was at arm's length. We're rectifying that. Other things like you'll go through ebbs and flows of things that work and don't, and don't be afraid to actually change them. So what would be an example? Things like our quarterly planning, we were finding we were getting to a point of over planning. You were pouring concrete around the plan when adaptability and simplicity are the most critical thing. So you plan to 100% capacity, you plan your capabilities down to the nth degree, and big room planning was taking weeks. And this most recent version of it that we're about to get into soon, we're just going to pare it right back. So actually go back to the first principles. What are the outcomes I want to deliver on? You don't need to know the how, you just need to know where you're going. So that's probably one of the bigger learnings that we're doing something about right now.
Yeah, correct. Thank you for sharing. We can't have a conversation without talking about AI, and you mentioned that you have an expert on your team. Curious to know what you personally do, what the customer retail team is doing in that space now.
And let's say it's varied. So our retail business use of AI depends on where you are in the business. And I talked earlier about that sort of building our own data and digital capability within retail. AI is one of those things where we still do have the corporate ICT kind of view of AI. It's a co-pilot kind of over for anybody in big business. You've probably all got co-pilot. It's sort of the co-pilot window on the right-hand side, and you've got a bunch of the access to the co-pilot native features. We've kind of thrown that rulebook away a little bit. And depending on what you're doing, we encourage you to just work with the tool and we make it safe. Like our software engineers do a lot of work with Claude Code. It's baked into their testing, it's baked into a lot of the stuff they do around quality. And it just depends where you are in the business. But we encourage people to play around with it. We don't want armies of agents that everybody's created running around. So we're working on guardrails for AI. We saw a first version of it the other day. It's very cool. It's again, follows that same principles. How do I create the conditions in which you're empowered to experiment, to play? But probably on the other side, this is coming back to your last question. One of the things we've learned a bit about is how do you be clear on the conditions for scaling? So this is with anything, not just AI. But we've had a few mistakes along the way where we probably weren't diligent enough about guardrails around what are the conditions for scaling. So to my comment earlier, you don't want everybody to create AI agents. Not ones that you unleash on the wild. So how do you make sure you have those clear markers of, cool, that was an experiment. This is how you make it robust and able to be used in a widespread way. And that comes with some really hard conversations. Maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I had one of the squads within Home Value Stream. They came up with a really cool idea, like a customer-facing chatbot. And we probably hadn't been clear enough that anything customer-facing needs a little bit more rigor than a couple of hours of coding. And so it was a very hard conversation to have, but it was one that
was it Lisa?
That was not Lisa. Well, I'm pretty sure she's got a few agents who are working them. But that was a good example of, okay, cool, we probably were a little bit too free and open, and we hadn't set those conditions up to help people understand that, hey, there is a higher bar when it's going to be customer facing. But we play around with it. We did a little, I hate the term hackathon, but we did a little thing where some of our team within a couple of hours had made a voice agent I trained it on a data set, I made a voice agent. And I loved playing around with it because you could prompt it verbally. So they were using, what's the Google one?
Gemini.
Gemini, and you can voice prompt. And I could say to it, like, the thing we're talking, I'd go, oh, the accent sounds a little bit too Australian. Can you talk like a middle-aged Kiwi dad? And it would go to YouTube or whatever, it would train itself and, it would answer your question. And like after, we literally tried to break it for a few hours. And after a few hours, the only thing we could make it do wrong was it said the wrong passcode once. But it was kind of cool. That one won't be unleashed on the wild just yet, but it was just a cool example of how quickly you can do stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask now a little of you, Nick, and some of your personal growth challenges, reflections on that the last 3 years journey. What do you have to unlearn, change?
Ooh, where do I start? No, I love this kind of working. Like I was lucky enough, and there's a couple of my contact ex-colleagues in here, but I was lucky enough to work there. We went through a mini version of this, is what I'd probably call it. And I mentioned earlier, like I had a lot of experiences early in my career where I got kind of thrown in the deep end, and you had to do something that really took you out of your comfort zone, and you just have a go. What have I learned? Like to my point earlier, you got to let go of a lot of things. You've really got to let go of a lot of the things. Your way's not always the right way. It's very rarely the right way, actually. And I've had to completely change my leadership model. So I'm used to being able to do stuff and kind of go in a particular direction. I've got to let go a lot of that and figure out how do I actually set clearer objectives to help nudge things along the way. How do I change up how I coach and how do I have conversations with people? I've been lucky enough to have someone in the room help me with a bunch of that. So surround yourself with people who challenge you. So again, like you can get really comfortable and you can get, especially if you're in an area of expertise, to just surround yourself with people who just give you the thumbs up. But I encourage people to challenge me. I love being challenged. I love thinking about different ways of doing things. Be really curious, like using downtime well, like listen to podcasts, all that kind of stuff. I wasn't a podcaster until a couple of years ago. I don't know, there's so many. I never need a more specific question.
Cool. I'll ask another closing questions. Like, I know that some of the audience here are about or in the middle of looking at the change similar to what you've been through. What kind of advice you would give them?
I think it's one of the slides we actually talked about the other day. It's not just shuffling cards around. Like it's not just moving job titles and moving people into different roles. Like an operating model changes. There's all the moving parts. It's governance. It's the actual structure. It's your ways of working. It's how you lead. It's how you fund things. It's actually understanding more about like where does your business want to go, and what are the capability gaps between now and then. Like I'm a big fan of kind of going on, cast your mind forward 2 years from now. What does it look like? And work your way back. Okay, what's the next thing I can do? If you think it's just one of those boxes or one of those circles, that's probably the first thing you're going to get wrong. And to my point, like even like governance, like how you govern, one of the big changes for us was we had to go through, and we fought tooth and nail for it, we had to go through the entire corporate structure of our retail business and change everybody's DFAs. Because people couldn't make a bunch of the decisions we wanted them to, because the corporate structure said no. And so you've actually got to look at all of those moving parts, and you got to start and rebuild from the ground up. So take a blank sheet of paper. Probably everything you're doing now could use a bit of optimization.
Also, thank you for sharing. So for more specific questions, we'll go to the audience. So, but first, I'd like you to have a small table conversation, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So what I'd like you to, there's this theme of culture and leadership. What I'd like you to discuss at your table is what are the cultural norms that you are trying, and challenges you're trying to break and change, and what have you tried so far? So share with your peers and have the discussion. We'll hear a few comments, and then we'll go to the Q&A with Nick. So we'll give you 5 minutes. Awesome. I'd like to bring conversations back here, and what we might do is do two things together. So what I would like to do is either you share what you've discussed, and a question that you got left to Nick. We have a couple of minutes left, so I'll bring those two things together. So, who would like to share what you've discussed, share with the audience the insights, and or any questions to Nick? We'll go here first, and then go over there.
Hi, Nick. Awesome. We haven't been talking about incentives. So one of the things that strikes me is in the mix of things that on the screen behind you, what people are incentivized to do makes a big change in behaviour. What did you do on that front?
It's an interesting one. There's horses for courses. We haven't actually changed our salary structure or our budget structure or anything like that, but there's definitely a big learning at the moment around the shift from specialised capabilities to more generous capabilities. So not necessarily about incentivization, but more like what's the type of behaviour or the type of capability we're trying to attract and retain. And this is where you might then get into an incentivizing thing. So we're finding even just the nuance of your practice model. So, you might still have specialized teams and, marketing and product. We're starting to find that's getting very, very blurred. And the types of people who are thriving in the model are very much generalists. And so that's a really interesting learning that we're working through now. We call them development pathways or career pathways, and it's that sort of funnel. You might start in a specialized area and you might end up in a more generalist area. On our front line, there is a quite different incentivization structure. So what we wanted to create was a path that you could go down for people leadership and capability sort of expertise. And so we're working on this at the moment around, you've got obviously you're more standard, like you progress through job roles, you might be a frontline person, then you might be a team leader, and you'll be incentivized for that. But we're creating effectively like a skills matrix. So if you upskill in that, and you might get X more on your base salary, you might get a one-off payment, whatever it might be. So we're working on that at the moment. But broad brush incentivization, I'll go to me. I'm incentivized for the whole of retail to succeed. And we're starting to push that more down, the more macro objectives. Everybody's in it for the goals of retail.
So moving from individual to more retail-based incentives. Yeah, awesome. Question over there.
What sort of training are you giving the team in terms of kind of mindset change? I'm kind of curious around how some of those involved believe you, particularly I guess as you move from personal and sort of the group who are really camp open and in terms of people who have more of their day-to-day work disrupted and also their idea of what their value is. I'm just talking about the kind of Protestant idea that more input is often what's valued rather than actually what's the outcome you're delivering.
We've invested pretty heavily in coaching around ways of working. We have a ways of working team that sits within the business, and we've invested pretty heavily in coaching. And coaching, not necessarily in like a agile coach. It's sort of like a combination of how do we want you to work and how do we want you to lead? Because there's again another thing I'm big on is everybody can be a leader if they want to, no matter where you are in the business. So we have a team of coaches, again, there's one of them in the room who recently left us. But we have a team of coaches who sit embedded in the teams, on the day. So your daily rituals, your daily practices that you bring to the table. And we've also invested in our leaders. So my team, our customer leadership team, we have a coach. And it's very important that we show up consistently. We are all on the same page with how we think about questions we ask, and we're very visible. So invest in coaching. You might think you don't need it. Invest in coaching. But there is a high degree of learning on the job. So it's that repetitive behavior. It's that showing people it's okay that they're not going to get it right on day one. But everybody here knows how hard it is to shift mindsets. And it is a moving feast. But you do, as you get wins, people are like, oh, okay. Again, I'll share an anecdote. I had a really cool conversation with one of my we call them value owners the other day. She was a specialist marketer. And she was a Power Shop marketer. She'd been brought into, the good old days at Power Shop when it operated in its own front building and they had a bar and all that, all back into the mothership. And she said to me the other day, like I was asking her for her opinion. Hey, I'm thinking about the next quarter. What are your thoughts on this or that? And I gave a few options that I was pondering. And there was one where I had different brand teams. And she was like, you know what, Nick? A year ago, that would have been me because I love doing the Power Shop thing. That was my jam. But I'm going to say to you now, that is the wrong direction. Don't do it. I've learned the value in operating in a broader playing field. So it was really cool.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, one or two more questions.
You were asking about norms that we've challenged. So some of the discussion at the table was around sort of the budgeting around, if you want to see the budget for product teams around DFA side, and whether you need to change that, otherwise it makes them slightly less empowered. And the other conversation was around just reporting lines and how they report into a team, but yet they still want to be part of their professional group, and just how you manage that. But my question to you is actually really specific. You have some specific questions, is tooling. Because we're in the middle of this with the very early, and we've got teams going, I use Figma for this, we use Jira for that, I use Confluence, we have Slack channels, and it's just getting a bit overwhelming. What are you using?
All of that in. You want people to work in the tools that they thrive in, and I'm not going to say we've got it right. There's a line you probably don't want to cross, but just like anything else, we've gone down that empowerment path of, well, what's going to help you thrive? We have Teams, we have Slack, we have Figma, we have, I don't even want to rattle, we've got all of those things and more. The worst thing you can do is tell people they can't have the thing they want. It's just like children. You tell them they can't have it, and they'll be like, but I want it, even though I don't really want it. So again, like to that comment I made earlier, people think they want something, they think they want to make decisions, but when you empower them to go, cool, well, it's your job to do that. Weigh up the cost, weigh up who's going to use it. So I would flip it around and go, you don't need to make that call necessarily. You can empower your team to come up with a solution. Set the conditions on which they need to make it, and then go.
Yeah, awesome. I think what Nick and the team are practicing is to move the accountability and the consequence of the decision to the decision maker. It's easy to make decisions but not carry the consequences, like the cost of tool or complexity.
That's the thing, the other comment, like when you lean back on DFAs, it's easy to just lift it up a level. But when you kind of go, that contract's well within your DFA, you make the call, they actually think about it more. I often ask the question, if this was your money, would you spend it?
Just on the leadership and culture aspect, I lead a company. It's only 8 and 6 people, quite a size difference. But even within that entity, the culture itself can vary across the company. Some people feel very empowered and other people don't, even though the culture as a leadership is that you're empowered. Do you see that in Meridian in your team, and how do you ensure that you get a more uniform culture that you want to see?
Yes. We've got our main retail offices in Christchurch. We've got about 150 people, and then we've got a bunch of people in Wellington, maybe 30 or 40 in retail. And the culture varies between the sectors quite a bit. Like Wellington's more like a corporate head office. Christchurch is where our call centre is. And even within Christchurch, there's micro cultures. Fair to say we haven't cracked it. If anybody has great culture, that I'd be interested. But I think it's around like, go back to what are the things that you value as a business that you're trying to encourage people to do, and just live by those values. We've got some values, companies, all of them, but we've got some company values, and actually showing up in that way and encouraging that way, but also not looking past behaviour that doesn't align with that is really important. I don't have an easy answer, but the short answer is yes, we have cultural differences. I don't necessarily think you have to have one completely uniform culture, but you have to know that it all is cultural, and that's all kind of aligned.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nick. Let's give you a bit of applause.